Sure, I'll jump in. So I'm Cari Kraft, and I actually do three things business-wise. One, I run Jacobs Management Group, which is an executive search firm in the medical device, pharma, biotech, and diagnostic space. As Morris mentioned, we have a boutique firm of about 20 people, and we are just life science focused, so we do all things life sciences. Also, Healthcare Sales and Marketing Magazine is an industry magazine we spun up in 2014. It's read by inside the industry, so pharma, biotech, medical device, and diagnostics, all the same people who we recruit and place for. And it's been an interesting process to spin up a magazine. And then also I'm a partner in an executive network called Experts on Tap, which is to, as Jacobs Management Group is to permanent placement, Experts on Tap is to people who want to pick up a project, an hour long, a week, a year, 6 months, whatever it is. All of the people that we've worked with forever who want to play golf half the time and share their expertise to our clients the other half. So those are the three things that I do, and I'm also involved in the in some other networks and givebacks where I can.
Awesome, Mario.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me. My name's Mario Carnevale. I'm an associate director of regional accounts for Novartis Pharmaceutical. I represent Novartis's total portfolio. I'm responsible for contract negotiations with healthcare insurance companies. We're responsible for gaining access for our products and ensuring that they are in a preferred position at the managed care formularies. I'm sure you've gone to the pharmacy and had, pharmacists say your drug's not covered, your drug is covered. It's tier 1, it's tier 2, tier 3. So we're kind of involved in all the scenes that happen or behind the scenes that happen from a managed care organization and a pharmaceutical manufacturer. I also work closely with the sales teams. We optimize opportunities at the various accounts that I call on. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the sales model during COVID, give you a little description about the sales model for those people who may not know about pharmaceutical sales, and then talk about kind of what happened and what we're going to look forward to in the future. That's it.
Awesome. Nicholas.
Gotcha. All right. So good morning, everybody. So Nicholas Pimlett. So I am Vice President of Alliance and Program Management here at Frontage Labs. Frontage Labs is a full service CRO. We can, our niche is essentially taking drugs through preclinical all the way through IND, which is new drug approval, requesting a new drug approval from the FDA. So to do so, we do CMC, we do drug metabolism and pharmacokinetics, bioanalytical work, safety and tox work, and I would say we're probably split 50-50 between North America and China. Before that, as Morris mentioned in my intro, I spent about 17 or 18 years at the French pharmaceutical company Sanofi. So I'm very familiar with the Eiffel Tower over Morris's shoulder. Seen it on a few occasions. While there, I started my career as a bench chemist and worked my way through a variety of positions doing R&D, compliance, commercial, medical affairs. Finally left doing transparency and business operations for the medical affairs organization before I moved over to Frontage. But met a number of you over the course of the process, networking with Beacons, and very, very much enjoyed it. So excited for this discussion today.
Excellent. Quick shout out here. I see Jerry Hampton has joined us, Harris Gubin, Robert King, Andy Watson. Really great to see you folks. So thank you. Super. So, what we're going to do is just sort of bat things around. Overall, in general, it's, I hate saying it, but the COVID impact on life sciences, but even more so the kind of things that these professionals have seen, surprising things, challenging things, just going to kind of let you riff on some of the things that we had talked about and see how we do. And certainly questions, if you got them, bring them up. Like I say, we're going to do a breakout session somewhere, I forget when, but in about 30 minutes. and then you'll get to shake hands and kiss babies. Otherwise, Cari, do you want to start off around impacts you've seen on the whole industry or the recruiting side? Appreciate it.
Sure. Actually, we are just in the process of publishing our our annual compensation and hiring survey, which we were doing at the end of late 2000. I mean, late 2020. I jumped 10 years, 20 years. So it was just interesting. I've been going through the results. So I thought it's not out yet. It'll be out probably within the next 2-3 weeks. But I found it kind of interesting that sales teams and marketing teams in the life sciences actually grew during the COVID time. I had to go double check the numbers. They grew less, right? They were growing. Medical device was growing at 5.6% and it grew at 4.9%. That 5.6% was last year's numbers, and that was already tamped down because of the medical device tax, but there was still growth. So I was surprised that we still had some growth. Pharma, it was growing at 4.8% and then it dropped down to 2.2%, but it still didn't go negative. And I had expected to see these numbers and have this be a report of disaster, and it wasn't. Compensation held, it wasn't the standard increase as it was, as we were seeing, but it kind of held. So I was really surprised about that. The other thing, I think some of the big things that we are noticing and seeing is right now, there is, it was like everything was tamped down in hiring, and we are crazy busy. All of my recruiters are insanely busy, and finding top really good talent is harder than it was because everybody who stayed in their company and who their company was loyal to doesn't want to make a move, and companies are getting really specific in what they want. So it's that's just a whole other thing. How much of a demand there is in a press right now. So that's another key thing that we're seeing. And I would say the last thing is just the whole hiring process, tipped on its side with virtual hiring. I mean, people who would, had to meet people, had to have people on site, had to interview, would never hire anybody without meeting them. Companies have, probably 70% of our hires right now, nobody has ever met in person. Companies have been working, people have been working at companies for a year and have never met anybody. So the whole hiring process has changed, and where people are willing to, the geography has expanded. Companies that are not willing to extend remote work are actually in a disadvantage at the moment when we have a position and the company's not willing to extend somebody remotely. And the good leaders are looking at this as an opportunity. They've seen we can work remotely, we can move everything and make things work. So we've extended our reach so we can, pick talent from all over the country or even all over the world in some cases. So that's a little bit about the kind of things we're seeing at the moment.
Really good perspective. Mario, from the sales seat.
Yeah, so just to begin with, the role of the sales representative in pharmaceuticals, the two responsibilities really that they do, promoting drugs to physicians via features and benefits, and then they're a vital source of information regarding drugs. Today's reps are more specialized than ever before. We look at oncology, we look at cardiovascular, we look at the biologics. So for a rep to be successful in today's world, prior to COVID, they needed to gain access to physicians, a face-to-face meeting. This is core to the industry and to job, perfection, getting the job done. So before COVID, it was already difficult in accessing physicians' offices for a number of different reasons. A physician's attitude toward the industry, lack of perceived value of the sales representative. We have systems of care, academic medical centers actually limiting restrictions for manufacturers. So we had all that going on. And then now comes COVID. Physicians' offices are closed. office staff, physicians, everyone's home. The pharmaceutical rep model basically disappears overnight. The virus really changed how representatives worked and interacted with physicians. So the next thing is, so what did companies do? What did representatives do when COVID hit? Pharmaceutical companies really accelerated their digital footprint. They used different healthcare tools and services. Many companies prior to COVID were beginning to put their toe in the water as it relates to digital virtual calls, things like that. But because of COVID, that just changed everything. As I mentioned before, doctors' healthcare's the only channel that they had really to disseminate information was that face-to-face meeting, and COVID really changed that. So, of course, the first few months, pharmaceutical companies basically suspended all calls. Everyone was home. Representatives weren't working. So it was really a difficult time for probably 2 or 3 months. After that, things started to open up, and I think that's really when the second channel or the multi-channel opportunities came in as it relates to virtual calls. They did lunch and learns in offices virtually. They had webinars, things like that. So these things really changed the way the sales rep interacted during COVID. And so when we look at the results, they were kind of mixed. Access to physicians were extremely difficult remotely. No one was used to doing this. There was a lack of willingness within the offices to remotely communicate with these representatives. More importantly, I think the time with physicians was decreased, and I think the sales impact was minimal. And when we talk to representatives and managers about what happened during COVID, they are still yearning for the face-to-face meeting. They have a feeling that there'll be some kind of hybrid model going forward. So as you can imagine, the results of this kind of work in a bubble, there was no face-to-face meetings. Interactions were very limited, and it was almost impossible to build new relationship for those new hires. I mean, as Cari mentioned, people were being hired, but it was very difficult for new hires to build any kind of relationship, and there was a loss of sales. We lost, significant amount of sales based on no new patients. Patients weren't going to doctors' offices. Patients weren't refilling their prescriptions for whatever reason. So there was really a loss of, adherence and compliance as it relates to patients getting their prescriptions. So I'll stop there.
That's fascinating. Cool. Yeah, it's a lot easier to not talk to someone via Zoom or a webinar than it is if they bring in bagels.
Yeah.
I don't know. Nicholas.
Yeah, thank you. So the CRO, or the contract research organization industry, grew quite a bit. So it was already quite a booming industry. If you're not familiar with it, essentially life sciences companies, pharmaceutical, biotech companies, agricultural companies, things like that, that don't have labs, or perhaps don't have enough lab space, they outsource things to CROs. It was already a growing industry because managing labs and all the infrastructure around it is very costly. So it grew even more during COVID because essentially people weren't quite sure how to adapt. They weren't quite sure what to do. They weren't quite sure how to manage the work that had to be done in the labs. And so they sent it outside. So they sent it to us and a number of the other CROs across the globe. So it was already kind of a growing industry. And I can say over the last now 18 months or so, it's been quite a booming industry. It's really been taking off. But nevertheless, as everybody else said, we certainly had to adapt as well. The idea that people weren't able to visit face-to-face was a negative and a positive thing. The positive thing is, people didn't live on airplanes. The The negative thing was we actually end up having more contact, more interaction, because you don't have to hop on a plane, because you don't have to fly to wherever you need to go and get face-to-face. People are more than happy to have almost daily meetings, you know, face-to-face this way. So checking in on their projects. So you actually kind of, in a weird way, because people feel as though they're being forced to stay at home, they're kind of like overcompensating and working with you more and more. But we also did some really exciting things from a technology perspective. You know, generally speaking, companies, the sponsors and our clients, they have to come audit us and review our quality assurance. Obviously, they can't hop on a plane. They can't come visit us. Nobody was doing anything face to face. So we did do virtual audits. Some of it is, you know, recorded and posted live and posted on our websites. But other times it's literally, you know, interaction while somebody's walking around a lab with a handheld camera and their cell phone, and they're saying, okay, go in that room. Okay, go show us that lab over there. Go show us that instrument. So it's kind of like, it's you feel like you're like, I feel like I'm watching one of the YouTube videos that my sons watch sometimes, but at the same time, it's kind of interesting. You know, it's great to hear from Cari that that hiring is expanding. I kind of have a different, not a different, but an interesting perspective on it for us. Is it's also been great in terms of, as Cari said, the remote work has made it so that the pool of people has expanded. You know, so we've hired a number of senior executives that are all over the U.S. However, some of them are thousands of miles away from any kind of lab or office space for us. So it's expanded our reach in terms of identifying, you know, more top talent. The double-edged sword, the double-edged side to it is essentially that if you are an individual looking for a new job, instead of competing against just people in your local geography, you know, you're now competing on a national or sometimes even international scale. You now have to compete against executives all over the globe rather than just people maybe here in the Philadelphia area. So, you know, generally speaking, the interactions have been very positive. The growth, you know, kind of as Mario was saying, the sales growth has been positive. You know, we don't get to have bagels, Morris, but we still get to, you know, interact very frequently with them. So, you know, we do these morning meetings and we have cups of coffee together. We've had some interesting interactions. I'll share with you an anecdote that I've shared with Morris about our supply chain issues. A number of our sponsors have come to us basically looking to try to find ways to solve problems for their clinical trials. As you guys were all aware, you know, this time last year, you were all buying, you know, off-brand toilet paper, and you were clamoring to go find bleach and things like that at the grocery store. Well, as you can imagine, that supply chain cramp also cramped, you know, the industry as a whole. So we had a sponsor who came to us looking for test tubes. They could not, for whatever, in any world possible, they couldn't, every single company they called, every single vendor they called, they couldn't get their hands on test tubes. They finally got down to the root of it, was basically all the sand that is used to develop the glass that is used for a test tube had all been used for COVID, right? So basically governments had stepped in and said, all of that is for COVID research, COVID testing. You have to allocate all of it towards that. So, you know, they find out kind of new ways to do it. They go to vendors that they've never worked with. I don't know where they found the sand. Some of you might find yourself at the beach this summer, not sitting on a sandy beach. You might be sitting on rocks or something like that. But nevertheless, they found a way to adapt, just kind of like the rest of us. And they ended up working with vendors that they never have. So that's kind of been the other positive side to it, is that I think there's a lot of companies out there that have been able to get their name out there, or kind of been able to get their foot in the door when they may not have been able to. And that's simply because they had supplies when other companies didn't have supplies. But that's kind of, I'll stop there and we'll move on to the next one. Thank you, Morris.
That's really cool. It's a sand story. It's really great. Cari, you mentioned something around companies are recruiting more specifically. If you'd like to sort of explain that a little bit. And I sometimes wonder in human resources if we recruit so specifically that we can never find anyone. And so then as a candidate, when you look at it, if you only fulfill 70%, should you even try?
Well, that's a big question. So the more specifically was a trend prior to the pandemic, that companies were getting really specific on what they wanted. Before the pandemic, it was a company market. There were more candidates than, there were more candidates than there were jobs. And so companies could be more and more specific, that I want a candidate that has, these 10 criteria. And one of them is, there's only a very small population that has it. And they were able to do that because it was more of a company driven market. They're still, they've gotten trained and used to doing that. So they're still keeping that. And we're no longer in a company driven market. We've flipped the scale to a more of a candidate driven market. So that's what I meant. And what you described, we call the purple squirrel, right? And whenever we're talking with a company about a new role that we're doing an intake for, we're looking at and saying, okay, here's what it's going to take to do that. Are you willing to pay for it? Are you willing to expand your reach for it? What can you live without? So that's a definite, that's just, I think that's something that we're just going to be living with for a while. Although there are some, it's also a company cultural thing. There are some companies that don't hire that way. Some of the bigger companies hire for runway and talent and leadership, and they have big HR strategies where they're, you come in over here and then they move you over here to round you out with that, and, over here. So in terms of what you should look at, if you're looking for a role, there is no, if it's less than 70%, you should or you shouldn't, because in one company, that's totally fine. In another company, you can, forget about it. So I hate to give those parameters. We know when we're working, we learn our clients, and I know like at a J&J, for example, they have a much, they hire for leadership, they hire for essence, they hire for growth, they hire for their culture. Now it could take a really, really long time in the hiring process because they vet for that. But you're more likely to get involved there if you don't have exactly what it is, where a smaller company who's, bringing you in and needing to, just, you have to hit the ground running. There is no time for training. There is no time for anything. You must have that set of experience. So it's very varied depending on the size of the company, the culture. So it can be all over the place. The one thing I will say is that knowing somebody in the networking your way in, is critical. That's just one thing, building your network and being sponsored and having somebody and having a coach taking you through the process. When we're involved, like when a recruiter's involved, the recruiter can do it for you. But if it's a role that's not being done by a recruiter, you've got to do all that yourself.
Cari, are you finding you just said kind of some of the bigger companies are interviewing a lot and they're asking a lot of questions. Are you finding as a result, the interview process has dragged on even longer? It's now, instead of a couple of weeks, it's now months and months and months. I mean, my experience from, actually, I have a very good friend of mine who's interviewing, I won't say the name of the company, but it's a large biotech in the, New York City metropolitan area. He has been interviewing for 3 months for one position. And they still every day email him. They're like, oh, now you need to talk to this person and another person. And he's basically got to the point where he's like, I'm done, guys. I'm actually I'm applying for other positions now because I'm sick of it.
Yeah, it's very inconsistent. There are some companies that are doing the old, they have their old way of doing it, which is I want everybody to be comfortable in my company about the person that I'm bringing in. And so they were continuing, and they're in those kind of scenarios that you described. And it's expanded because now it's easier for somebody. It's easier to have a candidate meet with more people because it's all virtual. You don't have to fly them here, fly them there, fly them over here. So companies that have that mode are getting themselves in interview paralysis and losing great candidates. I would say prior to the pandemic, 20% of the people that we placed, when the one that got the offer and took the job, had 20% of them had another offer. Now, 80% of them have another offer.
Wow.
Wow,
so that competitive right now.
So wait, that's how competitive. When we talk to a company about how, that is one of the key criteria. How quickly can you move? What is your interview? Let's look at your interview process. There are some companies who have shrunk the interview process dramatically, and they're just snapping up talent. I mean, we've had people go from first interview to hire in 3 weeks.
Wow.
That's all. That's it. But that's a nimble company who gets the hiring, gets it. And also it depends on also the level of the position, right? The higher the level of position, the more people you need to align and get organized around bringing somebody in so that they'll be successi So there's a lot of, again, I wish there was it's this way. It's not. In some places, it's like you can't imagine. And within the company, half the people get it, half the people don't. They're all like talking to each other. Like, I know, it's crazy. This person can't meet with them for 2 weeks. I know they have 2 other offers. I know they want to work here. I know we're going to lose them. There's nothing I can do. And the other, I'm talking to the CEO of a company. He's like, look, we find the right person, I'll interview them. I see, COO will interview them. We'll have one panel. We'll be done. We'll get it all done we'll get the interviewing process done in a week. And we'll sweeten the stock options and we'll do whatever we need to do. So it's, yeah.
I can only speak to my own experience because I joined a company in the past, 5 weeks ago. I went in, had my screening interview with HR. They said, we'll get back to you in a month. Within 4 days, they were back to me. Within 6 days, I had my main interviews. And within 2.5 weeks, I had an offer. And they're in full blown growth mode. And they're but they've compressed everything. Now again, it's a small department. It's not J&J or AstraZeneca, so it's not 30,000 employees. It's 1,000 employees going to 1,500. But they're moving because they know they're going to lose people otherwise. Just had a real fast question for you, Cari. Are you finding? I know it seems to be all over the place. But are you finding that big pharma is tending to go one way and smaller pharma another way, or is it just depend entirely upon random?
So first of all, I'll probably tell you my view on this is probably a little biased because big pharma tends to have more HR department. And so when we engage with big pharma, it's really just for the hard to fill positions. So, and they do take longer, no matter, yeah.
Very cool. I wanted to go back to Mario. One of the things that you said, and from the bagel comment, but the access to doctors or physicians or decision makers from that perspective, has going digital, does it work? Are they open to it? How do you get an appointment digitally with somebody who, it's...
Yeah, I think, to be totally honest, in talking to representatives, district managers, it just doesn't work as well as the face-to-face meeting. A lot of things are happening. The decision-making process for writing a prescription now has become really centralized, and that's probably for a number of different reasons. One, I'm sure, again, many people have formularies that they work with when they go to the pharmacy, so you have these managed care formularies that dictate, what drugs are on, what drugs are off. Do you need a prior authorization? Do you need to use something first before you go to another drug? These are all different tools that managed care organizations use to kind of funnel people into, hey, we got the best price on this drug. We want you to use this drug, and we don't want you to use that drug because we don't have a contract. So that kind of goes into, it goes into pricing. It goes into giving physicians less decision-making power. And then what's happening too is you're having these risk contracts. A lot of medical groups now are participating in risk contracts with insurance companies. And what that means is that they are at risk for pharmacy costs, they're at risk for medical costs, and they get a per member per month amount or $1 for each patient. So they have to work within that budget, so to speak. So at the end of the year, you may have one patient who doesn't come in at all, and you got that money for that patient, and you don't use that money. But then you may have another patient who comes in every week. They're in the hospital. So you're spending so much money on this one patient, and you're not getting paid enough. So at the end, these risk contracts, the physicians are either making money, additional money, or they're losing money, and sometimes they actually have to write a check to the insurance companies. And I don't think people see that because it's all behind the scenes. And you may be going to a doctor today that has a risk contract, and he has you for risk, so he needs to make these decisions based on pharmacy costs, based on medical costs, and what kind of diagnostics they're going to do, what kind of tests they're going to do. So there's a lot of that going on that really takes the decision-making process out of physicians' hands and more into contract and pricing and things like that.
If Morris, if you don't mind, I can chime in here because I just facilitated a panel last week at Pharma Reuters, it used to be I for Pharma, it was Pharma USA. And the panel I facilitated was on the hybrid sales rep. And it was a panel of marketers. I think some were from BMS and, but in big pharma marketers. And I was amazed at how much information they have about the HCP digitally. It's like Big Brother, and they're coming at it from the omni-channel marketing presence. So they know and they went to Facebook and looked at this, and they were in LinkedIn, or they were reading on Doximity, or wherever it was, and so that they can serve up content. And one of the main focuses was on education. In the magazine, we do a piece, it's called By the Numbers in every issue. So I'm always looking for interesting statistics. Everybody's always sending me interesting statistics. And it's funny, HCPs are actually asking now, they want the education, they want the content from the pharma reps. So where they've always been, it's always been their interest was less than the rep interest. It's now starting to, the rep interest, the rep connection has gone so low because they can't get connected that they're asking for more. So I found those two things to be really interesting.
And the other thing that's interesting too, pharmaceutical companies used to rely very heavily on segmentation and targeting of physicians, and that's kind of gone the way of the past because all these other decisions are going on, and now we're getting into artificial intelligence and what message that pharmaceutical rep will tell that doctor based on all this information that you're talking about. So they're looking at this whole total picture and what that call is going to look like based on algorithms.
Yeah, and people are getting really creative in the medical device space. We interviewed a CEO of Lutronic in one of the recent executive spotlights, and they turned their service, in medical device for some of the bigger capital equipment, somebody's got to service it, right? So that somebody's got to go there. So they've turned their field service engineers into, they've given them a talk track. So, everybody's getting really creative about, and they took time. A lot of companies took time. They couldn't see the docs, but the docs were home, some docs were home also in COVID. So they used that as a time to get them educated and give them CE credits. And, so those are just some other things that I've seen people do.
I could, I'll add to both Mario and Cari's part. One of the things I did over the course of my career was transparency reporting. It essentially requires pharmaceutical manufacturers to report every single dime that they give to an HCP. Everything from a cup of coffee to participation in a clinical trial to consulting, speaking events, everything like that. So Cari, to your point about kind of the data, pharma and biotech companies know every last little thing about these HCPs. They have an enormous amount of data. They know how many cups of coffee, they know what kind of coffee the guy takes. They know if they like it with cream or with sugar. And they know how many clinical trials they're participating in. So, Mario, to your point about kind of targeting, they'll kind of pharma companies, and I'm sure you're involved in this, they're looking at the HCP and they see what they're interacting in. But to your point, they're kind of also trying to branch out a little bit as well, saying, okay, they're really involved in the cardio space, but I can see they also work at this hospital and they worked together on a clinical trial with this person. So we're going to branch out and we're going to target them for this other type of activity as well. So they're taking all of that information and pharma companies are using it to their best interest. And in a weird way, the HCPs are starting to use it to their best interest as well. They're starting to mine the data and they're starting to figure out how to participate in more clinical trials and how to get on more advisory panels and things like that.
That's great. Great stuff. So I think we're right around the opportunity here to do a little networking. I'm going to divide you up into groups. But one of the things, and you don't have to talk about my idea, but one of the things that I thought here was, as you're talking about sales and, how do you get in front of the client? I think it's not just the poor pharmaceutical reps, but it's, the rest of us as well. How do you get in front of the client? How do you deal with some of this education? We don't necessarily have the AI and that a larger firm does. The opposite of artificial intelligence is natural stupidity. So I just figure those of us who are out here in the real world, maybe talk a little bit about that. But introduce yourselves. You're going to get about 20 minutes. So if you can introduce yourself in a minute or two and then have conversation, when we come back, we're going to ask for, what did you guys talk about and get some feedback. And now I am going to attempt, and Zoe is laughing at me because she does this so well. I am sending us out automatically to 5 rooms. Good luck.
Practice makes perfect, Marks. You're going to get this.
All righty. Hi, Mario.
Just you and me, Mars. It's
Is it
just you and
really?
me.
That's hilarious. Is it true? How come? Maybe we're not in any room for some reason.
That's okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah, maybe.
Okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
It's up to you. I think I can send you to. I have no idea. Really interesting. That's cool. Anyway, yeah, really good, man. You're really good. It's
good topic. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's
there's a couple other things I was going to talk about. Just kind of broader impact on the industry too, if you need some of fill time.
Yeah.
And then what the hybrid sales model should look like. I know Cari touched upon it a little bit, so I have some points on that. So if you need something, just throw me in.
I'd love to do that when we come back.
The hybrid model and just kind of
hybrid model. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, you know what? I don't think I set it for a time. Did I? I guess I can broadcast a message to all. So we got 8:45. Give them till, I don't know, 9:05 or something. So, yeah. It is. I wonder if we're recording this. Maybe I should pause the recording.
Yeah.
Oh, Rich. Hey, Rich.
Hey, good
How are
morning.
you?
How's it going?
Good. Good. Well, that wasn't 20 minutes, was it?
Yeah, what happened, Morris?
I'm going to blame it on me. I didn't see where it said how long to break it out. It was probably at the bottom of the screen, and so there was a lesson learned for me. But I'm hoping that people had a chance to at least introduce themselves. Any feedback, especially around, well, whatever you want to talk about. Anybody?
Cari had a good one.
Jerry Hampton?
No, Cari.
Okay, gotcha.
Mention what was invented.
Oh, yeah, I forgot when I introduced. Maria asked me a question. She asked, so how do you get in front of people? And I was like, oh my gosh, I totally forgot a company that we spun up this year called B2b Leads on Tap. It came because my son is the one who built out Experts on Tap. And when he built out Experts on Tap, he never wanted to make a phone call to he's of the younger generation, never wanted to make a phone call to someone he didn't know. So he built the entire company by learning how to identify prospects, target them, send them emails, connect with them on LinkedIn, do everything so that they would book a meeting with him. And then he would talk to them. And so then he thought, oh, we should hire somebody to do this. So he hired like one of the top companies. They were awful compared to what he was doing. I hired them for me, figuring, well, maybe, it was just his industry, we would try it here. We decided So he then did it, for me, but it's like all about email marketing, getting like building a warm-up domain so that, the domain is there, getting through in spam, having email content, dripping water. It's like a Chinese water, just dripping, and then getting an appointment. So now what happens with Jacobs Management Group is I hired B2b Leads on tap, and I basically get qualified appointments set up on my calendar with
And who did this for you, Cari?
It's called B2b. It's a company that my son spun up. It's called B2B. It's under the Experts on Tap umbrella. It's called B2b Leads on Tap. It's early, it's early on. It's in its like, I don't know, in the first year, they've got a couple of big corporate clients that are going through pilots, and it's crazy effective. I was saying, I'm looking at the ocean, wanting to go outside, and I have calls I have to make because he set up qualified prospects, and I gotta talk to them. But basically what happens is on my calendar, people pop in, they're like, I get a note, here's who they are, here's the history of the communication, here's why they want to talk to me, here's the roles they want to fill, and boom, I have a call, and then in comes business. Wow. Like a problem I've tried to solve for 20 years.
Yeah.
That's cool. Do other folks, I find that in my case, we've increased the number of newsletters, things like that, increase the reach out for non-business reasons. So, to talk about stuff, either an article, or we've recently joined with HR Awards, is in the Philly area where HR Department of the Year and things like that. So that the phone call is not necessarily, hey, we're looking for business. It's more about either networking or something from that perspective, but still it's a challenge. Anybody else had success with drip marketing or those kinds of things?
We at Prime Point recently, we work with Salesforce, been working with them for forever. And we're just tapping into one of their knockoff companies or extension companies, Part Dot. So that'll be doing the drip marketing and those things. So we're early phases with that, but I've already seen stuff that's, opened my eyes, and I think it'll be helpful in their methodology and how they look at prospects and look at the environment out there.
That's cool. I mean, I wonder sometimes the whole drip marketing, it's kind of like in the old days, you would send somebody a flyer or something, and the more flyers they got, the more recycling they had. But is it really, is it useful?
So, Morris, I can jump in there. I'm
Please.
taking this LinkedIn course, if you will, with a LinkedIn expert. And what she's sharing is content is king, but conversation is queen. So when you start to engage in fruitful dialogue on LinkedIn, just like you would meet somebody face to face, right? The end game might be to start the relationship or get them to invest in, your product or service, but to have smart dialogue and conversation on something that they posted multiple times, that is really driving a lot of the efforts. It's so that the landscape has changed. So content's important, but conversation is really where it's at.
And personalization.
Right.
Like with B2b Leads, the thing that's been really effective is every initial email that goes out, there's a custom, it's customly targeted for the person who's getting it.
When you say,
I'm getting sick of getting those emails that start off with things like, I hope you're well in these trying times. I'm like, yeah, I got it. Yeah, moving on.
Yeah.
Harris, when you say, go ahead, Rich.
I was just going to say, just keep in mind that drip thing. I don't remember who brought it up, but it's called water torture. So drip marketing as a methodology, at least in my experience, isn't as impactful as doing something like Harris said. If you follow somebody on LinkedIn, if you comment on their postings and they'll notice after you've done that a few times, that's the time to then reach out and ask them a question, something interesting in their field or what they were talking about. Ask for a clarification. Find a way to connect to them just to have a basic conversation to start, because like Harris said, it's all about creating that human connection to start with.
Yeah.
That
We
is
all
great
get way
advice.
too many emails.
Amen.
That's not the best way.
So in the breakout session that I had, which was just me and Mario, which I didn't do on purpose, was we had talked a little bit about the hybrid sales model. And I know it's come up in some of the other questions and things that we were talking about before. But Mario, would you like to give us a little more from the giant Novartis perspective on the hybrid sales model?
Yeah, so I think looking forward after COVID, that there's going to be a number of different things that are going to be happening. I mean, one is to create a new sales model, and I think the hybrid model is going to look like not just one channel, not just a face-to-face meeting. I think everyone's talking about, it's going to be more of this virtual, whether it's, following people on LinkedIn, Twitter accounts, things like that. So that hybrid sales model is going to be more of a multi-channel versus a single channel. I think the other thing too is representatives in all industries, right, are going to have to learn new skills, capabilities, and for the hybrid model, it's going to be up to that person to decide whether or not it's a face-to-face meeting, whether it's a virtual meeting. And so those decisions are going to have to be made on what's going to have that impact at the time. The other thing is messaging. I mean, we're talking about content. I mean, really, the messages has to be valued. For a pharmaceutical representative, it should be not just about, hey, this is my drug and this is what we do and this is what we don't do, but it should be more about cost and quality. Why would you use my drug over competitors? And for the representatives in the pharma industry, they're going to have to be better equipped to assist the office in this difficult landscape that we're in right now. Again, managed care, reimbursement, buy and bill, at-risk contracts. They're going to have to be knowledgeable to talk to physicians about that, because these physicians are going to be up against these decisions. One coming from a centralized perspective and one coming from, where do I write? How do I treat my patient? So that's the new learning skills and capabilities. Another thing that they're doing now, but they'll probably do a little bit more of, and I think Cari brought this up regarding engineers going in, the service people go, or I think it was Nicholas, that, engineers going in and having a sales kind of verbiage to talk to customers. We use medical science liaisons, and basically they're doctors of pharmacy. They sometimes work with field reps, sometimes they don't, but they go in and they do talk to doctors on a more scientific level. They can talk greater detail into some of the clinical trials that were done and some of the studies that were done. So we're using these higher educated PharmDs to go in and talk to physicians because they can give more critical information. I talked a little bit about that whole segmentation targeting. There's reasons that may not work as well today because, decisions are made elsewhere. And a couple other things about telling a compelling story. The discussion has to be focused on, what's in it for the physician, what's in it for the patient, not what facts that I know and I just want to tell you. We used to call it, way back when we used to go, show up and throw up, just information, and that's gone. We don't do that anymore.
It's still going on.
So again, essentially you have to know what the question is, and answering the question, why should the physician choose your product over another? And I think it's more important today to say, hey, our product may be more expensive up front, but we save hospital admissions in the long run. And so that's more incremental dollars savings, the savings in the whole health system. So it's not about how much it costs today. It's about what I can save you down the road. And probably the last thing is probably a culture change for pharma. I mean, we're going to have to decide, how do we go to market when we launch drugs? We've launched a drug during COVID. Guess what? It didn't go well. Because you really need that face-to-face interaction with these physicians to tell them about a new drug. I mean, they have no idea, no concept. So if you can't see those people, how do you get that message out? And then, from another sales perspective, it's really just incentive alignments. How do we align incentives to kind of, go hand in hand in what we're talking about, cost, value, and things like that. So there's some things that, pharma is going to have to work on for the future. That's it.
incentive alignment is a fascinating kind of compensation, human resources, but sales, commission, it's if you don't understand how you're getting your sales in that kind of environment, large scale environment, and the effort behind it, and then how do you truly reward someone for making an impact? That
Right.
seems to me to be the hardest part. That's the special sauce. How do you figure that out? But
Totally
um,
agree.
one other item that we had talked a little bit about in conversations was around the haves and the have-nots, and maybe that translates into who comes back to the office and who does not. So perspective on what do you think about that? Are you going to get promoted if you work from home? If half the people are in the office or whatever number, they're getting FaceTime, are you losing out? What do you think in general? Anyone?
In general, the answer is yes.
What were you saying, Rich?
I would say in general, the answer is yes. I work for an organization that's distributed all over the country, and there's no doubt, at least in my mind, that those people who are remote and don't get into the office very often lose something. I can't really quantify it, but there's definitely advantage in being in a physical location and bumping into the VPs or the CEO or whatever the case may be, and having the chat about the kids and how they're doing. All that personal stuff gets lost remote.
I agree. Yeah, the work that used to be accomplished just around the water cooler or with a cup of coffee in your hand, it can't happen now, so I agree. I mean, I don't know how long it'll be. I read an article a while back. They said after 9/11, they said it took 1 decade for the airline industry to get back to regular volume. Obviously, this wasn't a terrorist attack, but I'm wondering how long it'll take the airline industry to get back to where it was pre-pandemic. But yeah, I mean, over the course of my career, career growth has come through hopping on a plane and flying around and getting FaceTime with executives in order to help grow your career. And exactly as Rich was just saying, chat about the family, grab a cup of coffee, maybe even grab them after work to go grab a beer or something like that. I think I think it was the same. I mean, Mario, I'd be interested to hear from you because I know sales is always, remote. People are always kind of all over the country or all over the globe, right? But to a certain degree, from my experience, you still had the sales teams kind of congregate together from time to time, maybe once a quarter or something like that. Everybody would meet at headquarters for training, but also for networking. I think if you get rid of that, and furthermore, to the concept that incentive compensation and things like that are all kind of thrown into whack because you can't get FaceTime with physicians, you can't get FaceTimes with your clients, things like that. To a certain degree, we're going to have to get back in the office in order to help companies grow and to help your career grow for sure.
Yeah, Nicholas, I totally agree. And I was talking to Mars when we were in the chat room, is that, we have something, and I'm sure a lot of big companies do this. So, we have rotations inside for people who work remotely. I've worked remotely for the last 30 years, but, we have opportunities to go inside for 3 months, 6 months, do a project and, meet all these people, go out for beers and things like that. So for companies that do have that opportunity to bring people inside for a certain amount of time, I think it really works well. And we're going to have to go back to that. Totally agree. And we are actually tomorrow, I'm attending a sales meeting for the first time. They're getting back together again. We're having overnights in hotels. We're starting to travel again. And this has just happened in the last month or so. So things are starting to open up on our side.
Yeah, I also agree with that premise and everything everyone is saying, because a lot of companies right now are giving what they call a hybrid option. You can go into the office for 3 days a week, or you can go in the office for 4 days a week, or you could just stay home and work remotely for 2 days and then the balance of the office. And there is definitely a significant advantage and benefit for coming in the office because you have that interaction and the communication is much more effective, especially in the sales environment. Like, for example, you're doing a national sales meeting. But all the hotels have to open up and it's all good, wonderful stuff. So I think from my vantage point, it's going to definitely, it's going to change. You'll have that option, but I think working in a team environment in an office is going to be extremely more beneficial.
You know, I'd also add that I think it's important to be intentional about networking and intentional about what used to happen. They call the water cooler conversation.
Yeah.
That because I mean, remote is going to be more of a part than it was. I don't think everybody's going to go back completely. So to look for ways to be intentional. I know that managers are looking for ways to build that connection, build that camaraderie, do all different kinds of things that they can do virtually. And also in terms of sales meetings, I remember interviewing Randy Clark, the president of Olympus Medical, because they had done they made the call to do their sales meeting completely virtually. And all the things that they did, they came up with some really creative ways to foster those connections virtually. I think it's something we're all going to need to learn a bit of. How do you do that? How do you show up? How do you intentionally build those relationships? How do you have the non-office, non-work conversation virtually?
I can say one thing that kind of different from what we're talking about is Novartis actually has instituted a policy now that if you don't want to come back to work in the office, you don't have to. If you can work remotely, you're no longer obligated to come into the office. And it's kind of a cool thing for some of those people that don't want to come back, but it will be interesting to see how things work.
Connie, I think we got a hand raised. Connie?
I follow Robert Glazier on LinkedIn, and I get his Friday Forward every week. And last week's Friday Forward spoke to this specifically. And in it, he talked about how back when the internet all of a sudden came about, that CEOs of these large companies were saying, oh, this is a fad, nothing's ever going to come of it, blah, blah, blah. None of them are CEOs anymore. The same is really true now for the whether it's a hybrid or what. There are CEOs of larger companies who are sitting on big leases right now saying, oh, we've got to get everybody back in. We've got to get everybody back in because they're stuck with this for the next couple of years. But the reality is that workers have found a new way of working. And if it works for that company, we're seeing more innovations in how we communicate. And the companies that begin to start to embrace this are the ones who that innovation is going to really help them project forward. And if you sit back and say, nope, we've got to get everybody back and it has to be this way, and welcome to the dinosaurs.
Yeah, I agree with Connie because just from my own career, I mean, I managed many virtual teams. We were all over the globe and managed teams that weren't necessarily in the office with me. And there was no problem doing it because we found creative ways to do it. So for us, for me now, the transition isn't a big transition to work remotely. But I like the idea. I do know that every time I got I would say a very nice promotion was through my networking with people face-to-face in the company. They would watch how I worked, watch how I led, and maybe I would see them in the cafeteria. So there's something to be said for both. But when I talk to people now, colleagues or even others, it seems to me about half of them say they want to go back and the other half said, no, we're not going back, we're working remotely. So like to Connie's point, I think we have to just move along with the times.
And there's the financial impact in the CEO panel. Who was the CEO of Lundbeck, CEO of a bunch of pharma companies that I facilitated, I don't know, a few months ago. They're looking at, whoa, we can save a lot of money. There's a lot of money to be saved that we spend on facilities and travel. And how do we do this most effectively? How do we bring back groups when they need to work, but have not people have offices when they don't need to work? There's also a little bit of a financial impact.
There's more than a little. I mean, this is anecdotal and it's not so much life science, but I've seen these various pieces of information out there over the past 6-8 months. I know that in a lot of the firms in Silicon Valley where it's ridiculously expensive to live, we're saying, okay, you're going to be remote now. You don't want to be in San Jose. you can go wherever you want to be. We're going to dock your pay 30% because you're not living in San Jose anymore. And people are saying fine because they have a greater quality of life. At the same time, the big barrier in life sciences always was there was an assumption if you hadn't had previous life science experience, then you didn't know what you were doing, even if you did know what you were doing. I mean, I'm a lawyer. 85% of what I do is going to be the same regardless of the industry I'm in.
Supply chain's the same situation.
Yeah. So now is there going to be an influx of talent that's gonna where there's going to be a change and a little bit of that attitude, that because there's going to be so much talent out there coming from other industries that life sciences might say, okay, we're not necessarily going to say that unless you've had 3 or 5 years with Johnson & Johnson, you're not going to qualify for a job with us anymore. And just finally this week, I know that I was reading the Philadelphia Business Journal. One of the big law firms down by had office space near 30th Street Station. They're cutting back 100,000 square feet because it's a hot market. And they're like, our lawyers don't want to come in. They say that they've been working fine for the past 18 months from home. And if you make me come back into the office, I'm just going to go to another firm. Mm-hmm. And life sciences is hot right now. So it's financial, but it's also cultural. It's going to be really interesting how this all plays out.
Well, it's going to be impactful to businesses because between Gen Z and millennials, you can say you have to come back in the office and they'll find somebody who doesn't say that. So you're going to have a big talent hit.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, I think this is Bob Ferlotto. So it's interesting that just thinking about the work environment dynamic. So for years, companies have been working on teaming, building teams, this whole concept of teams, and there's a lot of information around it. But I think, most of communication interaction between humans is nonverbal. And the other big element of team success, right? There's been a big study by Google is developing psychological safety between team members. So people and leaders and team members have to think about how can you create that if you work remotely. I mean, that's something to really consider. It's not easy to be done at all. People have realized that when you're in person, but I think there's an additional hurdle that you have to get over when you're working remotely. So just something to think about, right?
Yeah,
So
I had a client last year, Bob, to your point, who every Monday morning they have a little coffee clutch, from 8 to 9. You can show up, not show up. There's, but everybody has it on their calendar. They also have Zoom free Fridays. So they're saying to people, no meetings on Fridays. You can have one-on-one interactions, but no meetings. And just to try to achieve that balance. But again, that human touch and being innovative in how we work together.
right, and particularly right when you're implementing and you're hitting challenges and there's sticking points, and there's a tension that can be created right when you're trying to get something accomplished amongst team members. So you need to think about what sorts of techniques, what additional things do I need to do to try to bring that cohesiveness, that psychological safety, that I think that dynamic that is even hard to do when you're in person, but how to bring that remotely. I think very challenging, but something to consider.
And striking the balance. I mean, when COVID started, we spent, my entire company, we had a check-in at the end of the day, every day, then
Exactly.
because everybody was craving connection. And then,
Right.
we backed off, and then you add in, I mean, I've heard of, we've done joint escape rooms, we've done virtual trivia, we're looking for ways to connect. I haven't done it because I have people that work that are, not in the US, and I can't send them things, but I've seen companies, send everybody the mix to make a drink, and then everybody get on and drink together. People send meals, all different kinds of ways to create that.
Yeah, one of my clients did a thing with bring your pet. So they would be like on, I think it was a Thursday, they were able to bring their pets on the Zoom, and then they brought in a veterinarian to talk about it. It was like very interesting. And it was innovative, right? Just got the teams closer together.
Well, I spent 16 years working at the world's largest supply chain organization, standards organization, and we've been virtual forever, right? All we do is meet virtually with people all over the globe. We get together twice a year. There's a biannual meeting in Europe and one in the US. And so we see each other for a week physically, and then we're apart again for 6 months. So something like that may become a logical replacement.
Sure. I just think people need to consider it and understand that it's probably going to take more work to ensure the optimal dynamic, right?
A lot more behind the scenes work for sure.
And
Yeah.
consciously doing it,
Yeah, intention.
it doesn't just
Intent is
happen.
important.
You have to think about it and then design it in,
That's going to be the Salesforce of 2025.
There you go.
I think it's
Ours on the
definitely,
cutting edge. Exactly. Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
tons of things out there, and it's just a matter of how do you package it into something. Look what happened to Zoom. I think by packaging those things in and
like companies, like Mario's company, where, how do you handle sample distribution now? Because there's got to be a physician sign off for that. And, and you're always fighting for space in that closet. If you're a GI doc, you've got 3 or 4 players who are knocking at your door to drop off samples. And, how do you handle that? You can't do that by a Zoom. So I'm wondering if there'll be changes in regulatory also related to something like that.
And before you get to the physician, you have to get through the office manager.
Right.
That's the one you really got to get.
Well, that's where the bagels come in.
Exactly. And lunch.
Yes,
Right.
yes.
I've sent more things to clients this year than any other year.
I think it comes down to vulnerability. I mean, if I'm a millennial and I think that looking for work is a sport these days, and people are just going to come at me and I'm going to be refusing offers, I'm probably not going to go into the office to build a lot of rapport. If I'm a vulnerable 50-year-old, 60-year-old, I'm probably going to the office a lot. I mean, it's at some point the music is going to stop and it's going to be tough to find offers again for millennials. And I mean, it's one of these things. I think that if you don't have a seat at the table, you're on the menu, right? So.
like that. Well, that's the T-shirt for today's session, I'd say. Cari, Mario, Nicholas, give you an opportunity here to say just the last couple of words. We're about 9:20. Really appreciate you joining, but Cari, if you just, your vision, what's more important now in life sciences than ever before, or what trends do you see going forward? Or certainly, again, remind us what you do and how we could help you. Please.
So I think that what's, to take out and move forward, I think what's more important than ever, I think we were just talking about it, intentional connection creation and relationship building. I think if I put my skills hat on, like what are people looking for the extra skills, the ability to, be self-directed, motivated, independent, the ability for somebody to work without being watched and produce results. Technical acuity, be able to facilitate Zoom sharing, making, do all that stuff. It's just like those kinds of things have been, added up. Being really good at what you do, because the opportunity for companies to hire somebody is now nationally or internationally. So honing in on, your value proposition in whatever you do. I think that we're seeing we had the lid on hiring last year. That's come off. I think we're seeing this massive, bubble that I think will probably, we're doing 2 years in one this year, and next year we'll probably do a year and a quarter. It'll balance out. I think the hybrid sales model and what's going to happen with all of that is still to be. I think digital and marketing is kind of stepping in. So that's kind of what I see for the future. For me, feel free, anybody who wants to, the magazine that I published, we did it as an industry give back. It's free. You can go to www.hsandm, that's H as in healthcare, S as in Sam, AND the conjunction, and then M as in marketing.com. Probably should have been a little bit more creative with that, but I don't know. We made that up and that's what we did. Feel free, you can connect with me. You can find me at Jacobs Management Group. It's jacobsmgt.com. Experts on Tap we named that company intentionally. So that's a good name, I think, of a company. You can find that. It's expertsontap.com. So that one's easier to find.
I think, yes, I think for me, looking at COVID and what's happened and where we are today, I think multi-channel communication is here to stay. You know, we're no longer going to be a single channel. You cannot just live on the face-to-face meetings. I think we're going to have to develop new ways, which they're already out there, on how to reach customers, Twitter and LinkedIn and all those other things, and the face-to-face meetings. I think what's important, I think for everything, it's content, content, the message. What message do we tell our customers? And I think the most important thing is the question, why me? Why are you going to hire me? Why are you going to buy my product? I think it's no longer, features and benefits. It's more about, give me a reason on why I should work with you. So that's probably a good summary of kind of what I'm thinking about now.
Fantastic. Nicholas?
First, I would say to everybody, please don't be too hard on us millennials. All right, we mean well. All right, we're just we get a little distracted by our phones sometimes.
We still love you.
Thank you, appreciate it. We love you guys as well.
I'm not a millennial. I'm not a millennial. Just.
But no, I'm really looking forward to it. Honestly, all this discussion, I love hearing all the different perspective about, okay, do we stay in the remote? Does everybody go back? I'm finding there's kind of like, it almost follows a bell curve, right? Like the really small companies are like, no, we're remote. The huge companies are, well, we're remote. You can go in, you can do whatever you want. My company's about 1,000 people. So we're kind of in the middle there. And we seem to be moving more towards, guys, get your butt back in the office, because we want to grow. We want to compete with the guys that are, much bigger than us. And we think to do that kind of in line with what everybody has been saying about how do you grow your career? How do you grow your company? We think that face-to-face and that human interaction cannot be replaced. And that's why I think the executive team of my company is really saying, come on back in, get back on a plane as well. And my boss lives in Montreal, probably 2,000 miles away from any kind of office or anything we have. And he's kind of calling me up being like, you got to get in the office. I was like, you're not even there. Why do I need to be there? So I don't know. I don't have a message to say other than I thank you so much, guys, for coming. And I really enjoyed this interaction. And I'll say the same thing as Mario and Cari. Please reach out. You can find me on LinkedIn. More than happy to chat with any of you. The CRO industry is booming. So if you guys are interested to hear more, you guys are interested to understand some connections about what we do, happy to chat.
Awesome. Great group as per usual. Our next meeting, I don't think is until September. We have a really interesting conversation with Jeff Dubrow is an investor at Prime Point, and Mick Naven is a Beacon member. They have teamed up and they've got a new product that they're doing, and life sciences and private equity are joining together to bring them to the table to tell us about what it means to get a new product up and on the market, and all of the fun that they've been having and will have over the summer. So look for that. Otherwise, certainly, if you want to get involved in Life Sciences Steering Committee, absolutely, let me know. Cari, Mario, Nicholas, fantastic job today. Really appreciate your efforts here.
Beacon is the premier executive networking organization serving the Mid-Atlantic region. To learn more, go to beaconforlife.org.